Hello and welcome to Stork'd, the podcast in which we celebrate all families and ways to build a family. This is your host, Julia. I am a solo mom by choice, and I love talking about families, and I love sharing the different ways that families are built. Today's guest is Abbe Feder. She runs an incredible podcast called The Fertility Chic and is generally an incredible and badass resource in the industry. We're going to talk about Abbe's own fertility journey, 6 years of trying to have a baby. I mean, raise your hand if you, like me, thought that IVF was essentially a guarantee to a child. Abbe too felt this way and was shocked when it didn't work for her. 6 years of trying, so many retrievals and transfers, an ectopic pregnancy, a miscarriage, multiples, you name it, Abbe has experienced it. And we're going to talk about how she navigated with her relationship through all of these ups and downs, and how she supported herself and her emotional needs through all these ups and downs, and how she supports her clients now. It is a gem of an episode with an incredible woman. I know you're going to love it. If you love it as much as I do, share it with a friend who might be going through infertility or might be experiencing a tough time getting pregnant. And don't forget to like, review, and sign up for our newsletter. That's where we talk about all things family building and fertility in real time. Here is Abbe. Welcome to Stork'd, the podcast where we talk about all things family and family building. I'm so excited to have you here.
Welcome. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you. And I mean, our paths should have crossed about 8,000 times.
Yes.
But ultimate thank you to the ladies at We Natal who officially connected us. And then after that, like 800 other people tried to connect us too, but they get the initial credit.
Yeah, I sometimes it's just like kismet. Things happen in divine timing or whatever. And so this was the perfect time to have met you.
Yes.
The reason our paths should have overlapped is that you are doing some really exciting things in the infertility space to support people who are going through infertility. And so we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about your own pretty extensive journey. And the other reason we should have connected is because a couple of the people that we just love and adore are friends with each other.
Exactly. Exactly.
That's great.
Yes. Timing is everything.
Timing, like in friendships and in life and in fertility.
Yes.
Timing is everything.
Yes, exactly. And here we are.
Here we are. Well, would you kindly give a little introduction for who you are and the work that you're doing in the infertility space, and then we'll dive into your story.
Sure. So my name is Abbe Feder. I own InCircle Fertility, and I'm host of the Fertility Chic podcast. And we'll get into it, went through an insane 6-year journey to parenthood, which I can say pretty easily now. But when I was in it, I could not imagine when or if it was ever going to end with anything positive. And from that experience, I felt like there has to be a better way to go through this. There has to be more comfort, more support, more resources out there. And so I built them. And that's what InCircle Fertility does. I hold the hearts and hands of women mostly, but sometimes couples struggling through family building and everything that entails.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I hold the hearts and hands.
Yeah.
It's such a beautiful image, and it's such a warm and welcoming image to what is otherwise a very isolating and cold experience.
Exactly. Thank you.
6 years. I mean, I read that on your website. I can hear those words, but I can't in my head fathom a 6-year journey to parenthood. Can you tell me a little bit about what that looked like for you?
Yeah, the first 3 were not with assisted reproductive technology. I was in total denial that there was any issue. There was never a diagnosed issue. We were the quintessential unexplained infertility couple. But I just remember being like, no, this isn't going to be our story. No, IVF's not part of our story. And I did that for 3 whole years of trying, quote unquote, naturally, which is a term I've mostly come to hate because, like I say, wanting to be a parent is the most natural thing in the world, however you get there. But after about 3 years, it was like, what the hell is going on here? And so we started diving into the treatment. And every single step of the way, I kept thinking, IUI, like we'll do 1 and then we'll be pregnant. This is all a joke, you know? And then I just kept going and going, and I couldn't believe it. And it was kind of like a runaway train. Once I got on, I could not get off until I got my result. And
Mm-hmm.
I certainly took pauses. I had a lot of things on my side, even though none of them were working. I was still at the time in my 30s. We were making embryos. I was having good AMH numbers and FSH numbers. Didn't matter. It was all not working. But I think that piece of the pressure didn't, I was like, if I take a 3-month pause, I'm not going to like lose all of my eggs, which I think a lot of us go through that feeling.
Yep. Yep.
And my clients too. And in some cases, it might be kind of true, right? Like you're not going to lose them all, but your numbers are going to decline significantly.
100%. It's funny that you talk about this runaway train. I have a friend who talks about IVF as a pyramid scheme. You kind of don't know what you're getting into, right? And then you're pulling other people and like, just do IVF with me. And you get deeper and deeper and deeper into the pyramid scheme. And sometimes it works. And sometimes you come out with a lot of debt.
Which I did. I still pay it off. I'm still paying it off.
Well, let's talk about that part too.
Yeah.
But I'm very curious about what was going through your head when you said, no, I have to conceive naturally. This is not our story. What was it that you were rejecting?
I just felt like we're healthy. I was so good to my body. My anorexic friend from high school had 3 kids, no problem. Well, I have a much, this is not rational thinking or fair. It's very judgmental. I'm just telling you the actual frame of mind that I was in. All my friends who partied super hard, why aren't they having a problem? But I am. I'm a good girl. I followed the rules. I was good to my body. We get what we want when we follow the rules. And I wasn't getting it. And I just kept thinking like there's something just not aligning here. And I'm a spiritual person. So sometimes I'd be like, okay, maybe if I say to the universe that I'm going to start fertility treatment, they'll see I'm serious. The universe will see I'm serious. God will see I'm serious, whatever you believe. And then I'll get pregnant. And that didn't work either. But these were all the things that I was thinking in the time. And, we had friends who were struggling. And I just remember thinking like, oh, thank God that's not going to be our story. It was literally just denial,
Yes, I actually do know very well. Very well. And that's so interesting because I totally know that theory that if you just speak it into existence, if you speak it into being, it might come true.
Yeah.
But what's coming to mind, and I've never really thought of infertility in this framework before, so maybe I'm totally off the mark, but Virginia Soul Smith is a writer who talks a lot about fat shaming and how we think about good and bad bodies.
Yeah.
And she's got this whole body of writing around what is good, what is bad. And I've never really thought about fertility in the context of what is a good and bad body. And if I just eat clean and, do all of the cultural myths around being a good girl,
Yes,
my body should perform.
Mhm.
And there's something there about our bodies performing in the way that we want them to if our values and our behavior is aligned with being quote unquote good.
Good. That's what I felt. Exactly. And it was less that I felt I was good, although I did, and more resentment at my friends who I would have judged as bad. And how easily they got pregnant, right? Like I didn't do all the drugs. I didn't party hard in college. I mean, a little bit, but nothing crazy. And I just remember so many of my friends who had disordered eating of some kind. And I always thought like, oh gosh, I hope this doesn't affect their ability to become a mother. And then it didn't. And then I was like, well, I didn't have that. Why can't I do this thing? Right? Like,
Yes.
We just take that on.
We take it on. And then sometimes my mind goes in the reverse with things like this, not specifically infertility, but like, well, if I had known, I could have just partied and still ended up, right? Like more like with college, when I got into college and then worked so hard to get into the college I got into. And then some of my friends like didn't open a book. And I thought to myself, well, if I had known that I could just party my face off and still end up in the same place, obviously I would have chosen that path,
Totally. And the reality is you probably wouldn't have, because I know you a little bit and I know you're a type A and overachiever and you follow your dream. And so like the reality is we probably would have done it anyway. At some point along my journey, I did do the no gluten, no dairy, no sugar very intensely, mostly at the recommendation of my acupuncturist who had been through 4 IUIs with me and I wasn't getting anywhere. And she was like, why don't you just try this? And I did, because I felt like, what if this is the thing, right? We'll try anything.
Right.
And I did, I think, 2 full egg retrieval cycles with like the cleanest I'd ever eaten in my whole life. And nothing changed or got any better. So then I was like, I'm just going to drink wine and have Snickers and pizza because that feels a lot better. So I needed that comfort, and it's the same thing. Like I tried it the way where I followed all the rules and it still didn't work. So then I went back to what felt good or more comforting in the moment.
Oh, that's a really good piece of advice because there's so many people out there who are like, just do this, just do that. If you do more acupuncture, if you cut out dairy, if you cut out gluten, if you add more protein,
Right.
just pray hard enough.
Right.
So something switched for you where you said, okay, I am ready to do the treatments. I am ready to seek medical advice. What was that aha moment that this was the time to do those things?
It was a new year. It was like a January. It was our first IUI was in a January. And I remember I have a close group of my husband and a close group of family and friends. There's 6 of us. And we used to go out on New Year's Eve all the time and say, a year from now, what do we want to be different? And for like 2 or 3 of them in a row, I was like, I just want to be a mother by this time next year. And then at that New Year's, I was like, well, I'm not doing anything differently to become a mother. So something's got to give here. So let me just go to a doctor and see what's going to happen. And so that was when they ease you in. They started me on IUI. Then it was meds and IUI. Then it was injectables and IUI. And after my third, my doctor was like, I really don't think you should do another one. But again, I was like, well, IVF is just not part of our story. So I'm going to do the 4th IUI and that's going to be the one that works. And it didn't. So here I am. It's just like these games we play with our minds my husband and I were he was really, I support you on what you want to do. He was not like, I really think we should move forward because I think it's a lot to ask another person to put on themselves. It's one thing if I'm driving it or you're driving it for yourself and you can make those rules and decide, but asking somebody else to put that pressure on is very different. And so my husband was very much whatever you think the right next step is. And he was that way most of the journey, much to his chagrin, I think, at certain points where he was like, what do you mean you want to do another round? What do you mean? And I was like, yeah, you told me I could pick. So that's what I'm picking,
Yep. Yeah. So you were really, we talked about the train analogy initially. You were really that like jet engine.
Yeah.
Mixed analogy. That train engine just pushing things forward.
Yeah. And that's really in my work a lot of what I do because not in any pushy way, but I find, and I found this with myself too, you cannot trust your instincts or your gut very often when you're going through treatment, whether it's because of the meds or the overwhelm or the stakes are so high. And so like therapy is amazing. You can unpack all of that, but who's the person that's like keeping you on the train to decide what the next step is, to help you make the next decision? And that's really where I feel like the support for my clients is most crucial. That's the sort of missing piece because everyone involved doesn't want to tell you what to do. They want you to say, like, I want you to make the decision. Your doctors certainly don't want you to feel like they're pressuring you into the larger piece of the pyramid scheme, like you were saying, right?
Yes.
Like into that next step. And so sometimes they're afraid. I find doctors are like afraid to say what they would do next because they don't want you to feel like they're looking for more money which of course they are, but they want they want your happy outcome. We all do. And so I think sometimes just having like a neutral party to really run your decision options through and have that person weigh in on what they think the best decision is so helpful.
You are so right about the losing your sense of your gut intuition. I've been finding that generally, like major life decisions right now, I am totally paralyzed around in the middle of infertility treatments. And I'm turning to people going like, I don't know what to do. Like, well, I can't tell you, you've got to do this. But when you have this constant chatter in the back of your mind, taking up all of your mental energy, when you've got your hormones going and you're injecting yourself with more hormones, when the stakes are high, when you're exhausted, any life decision is just too hard under those circumstances. It's not the right recipe for success with making a decision. So I can see how having somebody who is holding your hand, holding your heart, pushing the train along is extremely valuable in a situation like that. And maybe I'll call you to make some of my decisions for
Call me. I'm happy to. I really am.
Okay, so going back to your story, you did the IUIs, they didn't work. You kept going. The train keeps pushing forward. The pyramid scheme keeps going deeper. And you enter the world of IVF. What did that feel like for you at the time?
I really was one of those people that believed once you hit IVF, you get your baby. So it might have taken me a long time to get there, but it was going to work. And I was shocked when it didn't. Shocked. Devastated, awful, worst feeling. We had good results. I got good egg numbers. My husband's sperm was great. We fertilized fine. We made it to blast, no problem. We got genetically normal embryos, no problem. Like everything's going great. Textbook. We got 6 embryos and we were like, wow, if we wanted 6 kids, we could have 6 kids, you know?
Yeah.
And my first one failed and I was shocked, just shocked. I wanted answers. Nobody had any. Still nobody has any, but it was really, really hard. Really hard.
How do you, in that moment, how do you and your husband support one another? How do you support yourself? How do you navigate that disappointment that you just never saw coming, the kind of disappointment that just blindsides you?
We ironically in that moment, and this is a very specific answer, and then I'll go a little broader. We got on a plane and went to visit friends. We were just like, we need to get out of this environment. And, you know, we had a restaurant that we went to when we got bad news, IVF bad news. We didn't expect it to become that restaurant. It was like one of our favorite restaurants. And we'd go and order this one bottle of wine. Like that night, we'd order this one bottle of wine and our favorite meal. And we thought, you know, this is our favorite place and we want to keep it our favorite place. And then it became like our bad news place. And every time we got bad news, we'd go there and order that same bottle of wine and that same meal. And it became kind of funny and kind of a joke. And we both really did work to find the humor in things. It got a little bit easier along the way. The first time it really didn't. But we had a good foundation. Like I see how this can drive so many relationships apart. And it really can. It really can.
Mm-hmm.
And there were moments like the depths of despair in my marriage that were surrounding infertility and loss. But in those really hard, getting awful news moments, I feel like my husband was very much just there for me, was just as pissed and angry as I was, which is what I needed, was willing to like daydream about what our next steps would be, which helped me in that moment to think about the planning piece of it, and then to drown our sorrows in a favorite bottle of wine, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, you've hit all the points, right? It's allowing yourself to feel the emotions, to get angry, to get sad, to sit and wallow. It's allowing yourself to take action, you know, the planning, even if that's you make your plans and God laughs or whatever. Sometimes just the act of planning makes you feel like you've got some control and some like visibility into the future. Humor, partnership. I mean, that seems like the perfect scenario for helping a very difficult process.
Exactly.
So you said you still don't know what was going on.
Yeah.
How does that feel to have gone through 6 years of treatment and to be where you are now and still not know what was happening?
It's, you know, knowing now what I know now, I don't, you know, there are doctors that don't believe in unexplained infertility. There are doctors who will do everything under the sun to get to a root cause of something. And I think in some cases there's value in that. But for me, I'm very like, once I got my happy ending, I don't care what it was or how I got there. Or I did have a very traumatic birth, which I won't go into the crazy version of the story, but I had to have an emergency hysterectomy right after I gave birth to my twins. I'm fine. It's fine. Everything's fine. I'm not just saying it. But I asked them to send my uterus to pathology, and I was convinced they were going to find like silent endometriosis or something so rare that nobody's ever even seen it or heard of it. And that was going to be my big tell. And they didn't. It was totally fine. So I really still don't know. I think I did do an autoimmune protocol. There was no evidence that I needed to or that I had any autoimmune disorders, but my doctor was like, let's just try it, which I appreciated. And I really, to this day, I don't know what it was. I don't know. It's crazy. And of course, it's so easy for me to say now because I have my beautiful family. They were the ones I was meant to have, and I wouldn't trade them for anything. And I got really lucky, especially because I had to have a hysterectomy and I got 2 instead of 1. Like I think I would have had a much harder time with the hysterectomy if I had only had 1 child and didn't have the option. Not that I probably would have ever been able to have another, but that I wouldn't have had the option at all. So I feel very lucky. I feel like my uterus was like, you've done enough to me. I'm done. Goodbye. And I was like, goodbye. Then thank you for your service,
Thank you for your service.
Yeah.
Thank you for your
see
service.
actually above here. Do you see my crochet uterus up there?
I do. That's great.
Isn't that amazing? Like, that's the only uterus I have now. It's a crochet one hanging on my wall.
I mean, one of the things I'm appreciating is the humor and positivity that you have now. And you admitted that it's because you can look backwards and things were worked out in a way that is beautiful. But how do you hold on to the humor and the perspective in the midst of all of these ups and downs?
I think it's really hard. I think you have to sort of not expect that you're going to. I think that there's a very much the grief, I think in any grief, but especially the grief of infertility and pregnancy loss, there's am I ever going to laugh again? Am I ever going to smile again? Am I ever going to feel joy again? And if you know, because you've been through grief in various other ways, it does come at some point. And time heals. And when you're in the infertility journey and every minute you're not pregnant feels like a decade, you don't, right? Like the last thing you want to hear is that time healed. But once you can have some perspective on it, or after the first loss or the first failed round and how hard we took it, then the second one, it sucked, but it took a little less time to recover from. We were just kind of like, right? You learn what you can bear. I don't want you to have to bear a lot, but you learn what you can handle. And I think for better or worse, having gone through it so many times, we got it got a little bit lighter each time until it got a little bit heavier. And we couldn't believe we were doing our 6th round and it still wasn't working. But mental health is so important. Thank God we are all talking about that a lot more these days.
Yes.
And right?
Yes.
Especially you, all of us.
Like raise the roof to that. Like that's the community around mental health and mental health awareness, independent of fertility, is just doing great work.
Exactly. And I think feeling that we're not alone, because so much of the infertility journey, and especially when I went through it, this is now 5 years, my kids are 5. So things were not being talked about like they are now. And I felt like, I have nowhere to turn or talk about this. Nobody wants to listen to that, and in some ways, much like so many comedians suffer from various forms of depression and anxiety and use comedy, like there were just times that it was so insane and ironic, I couldn't do anything but laugh. And, it's dark, dark, dark times. I think my husband and I were good at making each other find some kind of funny or levity, even if just for a moment, to break the grief,
And it's nice to have that. It's nice to have that partner who's just, as you said, you talked about him as being like along for the ride, but it sounds to me like he was so much more than that. It sounds like he was really in it emotionally with you, that he was a good sounding board, a good thought partner, and definitely somebody who could laugh with you, which is amazing. And so if you're a partner listening to this and you're wondering, how do I support my partner through infertility? I think you're giving us some really interesting insights.
Thank you. Our therapist at the time said one of the tricks was like, even when you're so upset and mad with each other, hug for 6 seconds, like physically hug for 6 seconds, because something chemically happens in your body after 6 seconds of physical touch with somebody where you let down some of your guard and you can receive love a little bit better. And I was always really bad at it. And my husband was always really good at it. I would be like, you, no, fuck you. And he'd be like, 6-second hug. And I'd be like, no way, not this time. Don't even. And he would just do it. And it would be like, after 6 seconds, I'd be like, okay, fine, and it does. It really works. So physical touch is meaningful, right? We forget sometimes.
Yeah, it is. It is. Well, we jumped ahead. We were talking about your IUIs. We were talking about being on this train, and we jumped ahead to sort of your birth story to some extent. But I'm curious if you could talk through us a little bit about the interim, the 6 attempts. And specifically, was it like being on a train? Were you just doing the next thing, the next thing, the next thing? Or were you pivoting along the way, changing doctors, changing protocols, taking breaks? Tell us a little bit about the messy in-between phase.
Yeah, there were a lot of breaks, and there was a pivot of doctors and clinics. Yeah. My first doctor, I loved him so much. I still love him. I still refer to him. I just needed new blood. Like I needed a fresh perspective. I had gone for several second opinions, and they all were like, you have a great doctor. I'm sure I'm not. And then I went to my first female second opinion. And I was like, oh my God, I didn't realize I needed this until it was sitting in front of me. Just talking to a woman about it was such a different ballgame. I had met with so many doctors. Not one of them at the time was a woman. And so I decided I was going to switch to her. I just needed new energy. She was much more open to some of this more experimental testing, which my first doctor was much more old school. It's funny because now he's much more open to some of this stuff, but at the time he just wasn't. And I didn't know what was going on. And he wanted to be really aggressive in terms of like, well, maybe we should transfer 4 embryos and that's what's going to do it. And I was like, whoa, buddy, settle down, you know? Whereas my other doctor was like, let's check your autoimmune, let's check your, natural killer cells, all these things that are a little more experimental. She was open to. And so she also had been through infertility and miscarriage. I did have along that way, I did have one pregnancy and I was like, oh my God, this is it. And that ended in miscarriage, which was gut wrenching, really awful. Also really surprising. I think once you've been through trauma of getting pregnant, you forget you're not like free for all, right? You're not like, yeah, we're in the clear.
Yeah, you work so hard to get that pink line.
Yeah.
But there's so much else that has to happen from being on the stick and getting the positive to ultimately holding a baby in your arms.
So many things. So we had also done another retrieval. Like we had done a lot more things. I didn't just all of a sudden, I'm going to go to a new doctor. We had really pivoted a lot of things. We tried untested embryos because we were getting so many high quality ones back that my doctor was like, I don't know that you need to be doing testing. Save the $6,000. And when your doctor says that, you're like, okay. Yes. And then when I had my loss, it was an untested embryo. And of course, I had wished that they had been tested. So I did ultimately switch to my doctor, who I love. And she, when I met her, was like, you need to do this one test. It was a hysteroscopy. She's like, you can come in Monday at 10, or this was like in January or February. And she's like, or I can see you in April. And I was like, what? Where are you doing? And she was like, I am going on maternity leave. And I looked at her and I'm like, she's not pregnant. What the hell? Yeah. And she was like, it's a surrogate. I'm going to pick up my surrogate baby and take 2 months off. And I was like, oh my God, I love you. I have to switch to this clinic. And so I did. And it was not perfect by any means. It wasn't like all of a sudden I changed clinics and everything lined up. I did 2 retrievals at my first clinic and 4 transfers, and 2 retrievals at my second clinic and 4 transfers. So yeah, there was but at that point, she was so amazing and invested. I wasn't going to switch clinics again. And none of them were doing anything wrong. It just wasn't working. So, and there were a lot of mental health breaks in between. I was like, I can't take another physical round of treatment. I was working at a couple of different jobs at the time that all sort of worked together. And I was like, I think the stress from the jobs is doing this to me. And I left the jobs. And I got pregnant right away. So I was like, I knew it. It was the jobs. And then I had the miscarriage. So the first miscarriage. So it was not the jobs. And also, yes, jobs can add to stress. I don't advocate for you to be stressed if you're going through treatment. But also I remind my clients constantly that stressed people do get pregnant. So, right? Like sometimes we just have to take the pressure off. Like, yeah, we might be really stressed and we still might get pregnant. So, there were vacation plans that I either canceled because I needed to do more treatment, or would be like, I can't cancel this. I need the break. I need to take 2 cycles off. And I would honor it. And it was really hard sometimes. I remember I had an ERA, a uterine biopsy, and they messed it up. My doctor was on maternity leave. Somebody else in the clinic did it. He messed it up. I was livid. And they have to do it at a very specific time of your cycle. So I was going to have to wait a whole month. And that 1 month, I was like going to Europe for the first time in I don't know how many years, many, many, many years for a wedding. And I was like, I'm canceling Europe. And my husband was like, no, like, please don't. Like, we've been looking forward to this. And I'm like, I can't wait. 2 more months in this journey is like 2 more years in this journey. And he was like, yeah, it's really not. If you look at it, like big picture, it's really not. Like, go to Europe, have the vacation. And that's another thing I tell my clients. I know how hard it is to spend every minute or like another birthday around the sun, not pregnant, another New Year's around the sun, not with your family. It's horrible. But also, like, you have to live your life sometimes. And if you don't, it will pass you by. And all you will have to show for it is a lot of medical bills and physical and emotional pain. And so I think if you can take that trip or see that friend or visit that family member, I know it's easier said than done, but you should, you know?
It is so hard. You
It's really
know,
hard.
as you said, 2 months feels like 2 years.
Yeah,
And it can just, and you wonder, what if that was the month that things were
right.
supposed to happen? What if that was and at the same time, as you just identified, you're human. You need to have the full range of human experiences. And that includes rest and breaks and
Yes.
healing and joy and fun.
And we
Fun.
we forget to have fun a lot on this path. You
Yeah.
know, we have to remind ourselves.
Yeah. So, what advice do you have for somebody who is? I mean, we've already articulated that making decisions when you're going through fertility treatments is like nearly impossible.
Yeah.
How do you advise somebody think about the big pivots? When to switch doctors, when to switch protocols, how to make those major and micro decisions along the way?
I think a lot of what I tell people is if this were your best friend or your sister, what would you want them to do? I think it's very hard for us sometimes to put ourselves in the situation or we can't make the decision. Or, right, like, I remember everybody was like, switch doctors, switch doctors, switch doctors. And I was like, I'm not switching doctors. Like, he really cares about me. And I felt like that's such a champagne problem. The issue is not my doctor. It's me.
Yeah.
My mom was like, try to get another doctor. I'm like, can you just admit that I'm the problem? And I would have never allowed someone that I love or cared about to go through so much treatment without getting other opinions. So I couldn't see the forest through the trees when I was in it. But if you can imagine talking to somebody that you love so dearly, what would you want them to do? I think it really informs sometimes what we can do for ourselves.
That's great. I have actually never thought about it that way.
It
With
really goes for any self-care, medication, healthcare, because I
Yeah.
think, right, you would want somebody you love to take the mental health break that they need or go to get a massage on a, really hard like if it's a really chaotic time, like I think about with me and my husband, it's just like not a good time for me to go get a massage, but I know if he goes, he will be a better human and a better partner. Like I wouldn't see that for myself, but I would see it for him. So I have to remind myself, okay, go do your self-care, right? Because it will help everybody else in your life. That kind of thing really helps.
How do you advise people when they're thinking about the cost of IVF? And what I mean by that is we're talking about things that you can layer on to help calm your nervous system, take care of yourself, make sure that you're mentally sound, mentally well. But those
Yeah.
things are expensive. Massages, vacations, getting a bottle of wine, even going to see a friend. All of those are little luxuries or big luxuries
Hmm.
on top of a very expensive process. It can be hard to navigate all of that at once. What do you say
Yeah.
to people who say, well, it's such a privilege to go through IVF and have the resources to do that? I don't then have the money to spend on self care too.
Yeah. Well, I think a couple things. A reframe for me is I want to make the most of the time that I am going through this treatment so that it doesn't feel prolonged and longed and longed and long. So I want my emotional and physical state to be in the best possible state that it can be so that the first round works or the second round works. And we're not talking about year after year after year that you're spending more money, right? Like, like bang for your buck is what I want you to get. So if you're already going through all of this work emotionally, physically, and financially to do IVF, which is insanely expensive, what can you do to put yourself in the best possible position for it to work? And you have to really invest and look at all those pieces of the pie, the emotional side, the physical side, the massages, the self-care, getting a coach, getting some people. I mean, this is my number one objection that people give me when they want to work with me is like, I just don't know how I'm going to afford it. And I get that. And I'm so sensitive to it. But I want you to have success as fast as possible and not and keep you from having to spend time and money and resources down the road. And then also, the way that I always looked at it financially, for better or worse, was I don't want to wake up one day and realize I'm out of eggs. But if I wake up one day and realize I'm $20,000 more in debt, I'll live with myself. So, money's renewable, embryos are not necessarily. And that was just what was driving me the whole time. To the point where, like I said, like it took us, we don't own a home. Our home is in the form of our 2 children who live down the hall from us. And that is worth every penny. And I don't
Yes.
care, but
Yes.
I really don't. But it was debt, it was loans, it was opportunity cost of other things we couldn't pay for because all we were doing was paying off debt and loans. And
Yep.
I would have it no other way. And it's not for everyone. And some people I tell that to, and they're like, that's completely irresponsible. And some people feel that way, and it might be. For me, that was how I prioritized, and I stand by my choice.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I always go back to values, and what do you value and what's your priority? And whenever you're thinking about any phase of this journey, saying, I'm going to optimize for X, I'm going to optimize. I'll give you an example. I'm trying to decide right now between 2 preschools, and one would optimize for convenience and the other would optimize for magic. It's a very magical space, right? And so my heart wants to optimize for magic, and my practical brain is like, yeah, but this one's so easy and logistically right. And it makes me as a mom a better person because I'm not scrambling. So, but either one is the right choice. It depends on what it is that you're valuing. What do you put as your first and foremost?
Exactly.
And if you're saying my first and foremost is trying to get to baby or babies, and it is less important for me to own a home or to go on vacations or to afford, beautiful outfits or whatever, that's a great way to think about it.
Totally.
And if you're optimizing for financial security and stability, you might choose maybe not to spend the extra money on the PGT testing or the acupuncture or the add-ons to the fertility process.
Right. And much like your magic, right? If you go with the practical, you ask yourself, where can I provide magic for him that's not that school?
Yes.
So similarly, right? Like, where can I find the extra that work within my budget, my reach, my comfort zone, while also giving myself, whatever my value dictates is the more important thing. And there are ways. There are all kinds of ways now. At the time, I don't think there were, but there are ways. There are, from financially, there are jobs you can take for part-time that have benefits or grants that are out there. And to be honest, so much time was spent on this journey. I didn't have more bandwidth to look for every financial resource out there, but there are a lot of them out there right now. There are grants, there are interest-free loans, which we did get as part of our journey, which was a godsend. We took a new credit card every couple months that was like, no interest, no interest. We'd grab a new one and just keep piling it on, but we paid it off with no interest. And like you said, that's where I found my line was, my threshold was. And it's different for everyone, but in your example, like, I love, where else can you find the magic if it's not coming from that preschool, right? And there are places.
Yeah. So interesting. Well, let's talk about coaching for a second, because since this journey for you, you've become a coach and a guide for others. You said it. I hold your hands and your hearts. When does somebody turn to a coach? Like, when would I turn to a coach? What would you recommend for our listeners in thinking about resources such as coaching?
So it's a great way to ask. And what I say about myself is that I'm an infertility coach, not a fertility coach. I think that a fertility coach will help you optimize your nutrition and your body, and for sure your mindset. But people come to me when there's already struggle. Usually they've already been to a fertility doctor. Maybe they've already had a loss or some form of treatment. Maybe they don't love their clinic and they're not sure what to do. Like, I get them when they're in the infertility journey already. In some ways, I wish I got them sooner, because a lot of my clients end up picking the wrong clinic or the wrong doctor. Like, I wish an OB, I wish I was getting referrals from OBs instead of fertility doctors. Not that I don't want my fertility doctor referrals, but if an OB knows a client is going to need treatment, like, bring on whoever in the team you can bring on, is the way that I look at it. And I just think, we accept doulas and midwives and lactation consultants now. For a long time, we didn't. Everybody was like, no, the mother has to do it all on her own. And we learned how detrimental that was to the children, to the mother, to the mental health. Similarly, we need to find these resources through the infertility journey because we are putting too much on ourselves to figure out. And
Yes.
it's just, again, like prolonging this journey.
Yes.
I just wish that it were more commonplace to accept help along the way. But because we're already resenting the fact that so many people can do this without help, we're reluctant to reach for help. And I think the sooner you can get a team together, the better your journey is going to go. And it's going to suck. Like, don't get me wrong. It's a terrible journey to be on. Like, let's make it as good for you as we possibly can, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. It's such a good point about there are other places in which we accept help.
Yeah.
And there, for instance, if you were struggling with your mental health, you wouldn't say, okay, I'm just going to fight through this on my own. You might choose to see a doctor and you might use to lean on a prescription. You might lean on a therapist. You certainly are going to lean on your friends.
Right.
So it's a good parallel.
Yeah.
Are there themes for the type of people that come see you? Are they mostly those you mentioned who have gone through a loss? Or are they mostly those who are type A people that like to have the roadmap and the plan? What's the kind of trend in your client base?
It's a lot of type A people who are not necessarily, they all want to see the roadmap, right? We all want to know when it's going to happen for us. Like the way that I say it is I can't guarantee you a baby, but I can guarantee that you start to feel in control of a completely out of control process.
Yeah.
So it's like they've hit that point of where it feels out of control. They've tried something, it's not working. They've tried another thing, it's not working. They're used to doing exactly the right steps and it working out. There's frustration, maybe the relationship they're in, if they're in a relationship is started. And this even goes for parental relationships, friend relationships. All the relationships are starting to feel like there's anger and resentment and they're just annoyed and pissed at everyone because they're getting more and more frustrated with their journey. And it bleeds into our entire life. And so that's when they come to me. And I love getting them at that point. And I wish I get them before then so that they don't even get to that point, you know?
Yes. Yeah. What can somebody expect if they chose to work with you?
So logistically, it's like a certain number of Zooms per month and unlimited texting. What it really is preparation for all your doctor's appointments, which can be huge because a lot of times what happens, and it happened with me, and I was like deep into years of fertility treatment. I would go to the doctor, I would have my list of questions, and then I'd leave and realize I forgot to ask half the questions.
Yep.
Right. And then it's so frustrating. And then it's like, oh, now I have to like go through the portal to find the nurse, to ask the doctor. Right. So we make sure that you feel really prepared and then we debrief after. So like, here's what the doctor said. Let's interpret that into how it works into my case. Do we agree with it? Don't we agree with it? Did we miss something? And each client has different needs. Some of my clients want me to get on their doctor Zooms with them. And sometimes, and I will, if that's what they want. And I will say, like, so many fertility doctors are so much more open to working with this village of people helping their clients because it does help them. It takes some of the pressure off of them, and they know that their patients are getting additional support, which is always helpful. And it is sometimes like, hey, I got in a huge fight with my mom last night because she asked me again when I'm going to have a baby, and I just don't know how to handle it. And we'll talk that piece of it out. Right. And sometimes it's a text message from a client who's like, my sister-in-law just offered to be my surrogate and I want to both hug her and punch her, you know?
Yeah.
So it's like a lot of, we walk through Mother's Day together. I send as many resources as I can. I do research for my clients. Like, you know, I put calls out to my internal network if somebody's looking for a specific kind of donor or embryo. Because as you know, we are a very tight-knit community that really wants everybody to succeed. And so you have access to my referral network and all the resources that I have, which are really huge assets in the journey now, you know, that weren't there when I was going through it.
Yes. Yes, it is. They always say it's the worst community, but the kindest people.
Yeah.
So having walked through so many journeys, including your own, having held so many hearts and hands in this process, how do you think about families? How has that shaped how you define family for yourself?
I love that question. Family is really chosen to me. Whether that choice means I chose to do treatment to get to biological family, or I've created this incredible community of people who I love and respect, and that is going to be my family for the rest of my life.
Yes.
I have seen so many relationships shift in the family sense that, I mean, I live in LA. It's a very transient city. Most people are not from here. And I wouldn't be able to leave it mostly because of the extended family that's become my community here. That is everything. And when you are going through infertility and when you ultimately hopefully have children, if that's what you decide you want, the people you surround yourself with are crucial to the journey. You're the people you can lean on for childcare. Like my parents don't live nearby, my in-laws don't live nearby. We really rely on our friends and our neighbors and our team of people that we've created. And that to me is all part of an extended family.
Yeah.
And I think there are so many, and I know this sounds so cliche, but like meant to be relationships that come unexpectedly from various experiences in life. Like I'm an artist in residence with a theater company, and one of the women in the company is like 85.
So fun.
She's
Yeah.
so fun. And she's 85 and she's like one of my closest friends. And she was like a pillar for me during my fertility journey. Never would have thought or expected that. And she is like family to me, so there are just people who come in and out of your life who become family. And what I love about having children is like we emulate that for them. Like they see us with a mix of all different kinds of people who are close to us. And I'm very much like an all or nothing. So our people are either our people or like, I don't have time for you, like that's just, I like the quality over quantity.
Yeah, I like that. And, I've thought a lot about community as family. I think you and I share that. Like,
Yes.
I just love building community. I love creating my network. And I've never thought about it in the context of emulating for my kids what community and what family could be as a result.
Yeah.
So that's beautiful. I'm going to take that away with me.
Good. I think you probably do it more than you realize because as a single mom by choice, he sees that you rely on other people. And that's probably just totally normal for him. For you, it feels like a choice, but for him, it's like, this is my life. Yeah.
Yeah. That's
love that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Abby, is there anything we haven't covered that you really would like to share with the Stork'd audience?
Oh my gosh. I think we hit it all.
I know. We did cover quite the waterfront.
Yeah. Get help. I get help in every and all ways, when and where you can.
Amazing. Yes. And if you want to get help from you, Abby, how does somebody find you?
I'm InCircle Fertility is my company. I'm InCircleFertility.com, InCircle Fertility on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on Facebook, on all the places. DM me, grab a 15-minute call on my website, see if I can help lighten the load for you. And just reach out. I love connecting with people. I do check all of my DMs. So slide into my DMs if you like. And then you can find me on my podcast is the Fertility Chic, which I just hope, much like your podcast, provides support and feeling seen and feeling supported through the journey.
That's what it's all about. It's building community. It's building that chosen family, or at least hearing somebody else's story so that you don't feel so alone. And so
Exactly.
Thank you for all that you do to support people, guide them through this process, to share stories on your podcast, to share your story on podcasts like this. You're really a gem. Thank you.
No, thank you. Can't wait for you to come onto my podcast and share with your audience too.
So fun.
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Thank you for listening to Stork'd with your host, Julia Carroll. This podcast is changing the conversation around the ways people define and create family. If you like what you hear, please support us by sharing with friends and following on Instagram at Stork'd_podcast. We also always appreciate it when you rate and review us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. For more information, visit storkedpodcast.com to sign up for our newsletter. That's STORKD podcast.com.